At the turn of the millennium, Square and Final Fantasy were riding high. 7 had evolved into a cult classic, 8 was generally well received, and 9 had just been released. With the entry into the 21st century also came Sony's latest console, and with it, anticipation as to where gaming would go on this new, upgraded hardware. So when 10 was being conceived at a time before people knew you could chuck a 2 at the end of a PlayStation, there was a lot of hype and expectation to live up to. And now, after quarter of a century, Final Fantasy X is regarded as a fan favourite and a perfect entry point for new players to the series. But does it live up to, carry, and deserve the praise it has garnered over the years? I'm TSM, and this is Final Fantasy X, 25 years later. Once development of Final Fantasy VIII had officially wrapped, Yoshinori Kitase began looking onto the next official installment in the series. But with Hironobu Sakaguchi and Hiroyuki Ito already committed to what would become Final Fantasy IX, Kitase began assembling a new team to take on the following chapter. While 9 was a homage to the series' roots with the look and feel, Kitase wanted to bring something new. He has stated in interviews that after the release of 8, players had begun expressing disappointment in a trend that was seemingly being set by the more sci-fi world settings of the previous 2 games, preferring what he described as a simple fantasy world. In Kitase's mind, these players had developed a rather stagnant idea of what fantasy meant, that it can only be fantasy if the setting was centered on medieval European design. Instead of catering to what these fans were asking for, Kitase instead decided to challenge and change their perception, to create a fantasy world that drew heavily from Asian influences, specifically Thailand and the South Pacific, which when you look at areas like Besaid and Kilika, is evident. Kazushige Nojima was brought on to help develop this new definition, and it was in these brainstorming sessions that these ideas began flowing. Art director Yusuke Naura and character designer Tetsuya Nomura were enlisted to design the world and the people inhabiting it. The staff has spoken about the focus given to provide all the cultures and people of Spira distinct designs and styles of clothing, mentioning specifically garbing the Al-Bhed to make them look like a more machine-oriented society, or the Ronso in clothing that would allow them to easily engage in battle. Nomura would describe all the finer attention spent on the art design as the main difference between 10 and previous Final Fantasy titles. With such an ambitious world and design concept, technical problems were bound to present themselves. Hironobu Sakaguchi served as executive producer and spoke about his concerns of the jump from the PS1 to the PS2. He stated, "Going from 6 to 7, everyone was uneasy about the transition. In making the jump to 3D, I had to ask myself whether this was indeed a Final Fantasy world as we progressed. This time, moving to the PlayStation 2, adding voices and conducting everything in real time, brought its own share of anxiety." He would go on to say that the true definition of Final Fantasy for him was to continue exploring new frontiers and to challenge himself, to move in directions yet to be uncovered. The acceptance of the challenges of the PS2 and the drive to try accomplish something that had never been done before resulted in one of the biggest leaps of graphical fidelity. This is obvious in character animations and facial structure. Designers were given freedom with facial expressions, being able to include many different bones in the faces that allowed for more natural expressions. At the time, the PS2 was a complicated piece of kit and development was considered complex, but Square kept pushing the hardware until it showed its true potential, and they took full advantage of that. From Final Fantasy VII to 9, character models could only move along specific pathways on pre-rendered backdrops. With 10, environments would be fully realised in 3D and rendered in real time. And while the player was not given full control of the camera, there would be some areas that are traversable where the camera would glide over the player and highlight key structures and points of interest. Final Fantasy VII was my first introduction to the series, but 10 was the first one that I played. And seeing the leap from the PS1 to the PS2 left a lasting impression on me that I haven't forgotten all these years later. The story follows Tidus, a star blitzball player from the technologically advanced city of Zanarkand. During the course of one of his games, Zanarkand is attacked by a kaiju-like creature called Sin. After running into Auron, who has acted like a somewhat of a mentor figure for Tidus at the request of his father, the two fight their way through Zanarkand, eventually reaching Sin. The two are then seemingly absorbed into Sin, while the city is destroyed around them, and after an unknown amount of time, Tidus becomes conscious in an unknown world. Once found by scavengers, known as the Al Bhed, a girl named Rikku explains that Tidus has been brought forward in time to a place called Spira, and that Zanarkand was destroyed about 1,000 years ago. Another encounter with Sin brings Tidus to the island of Besaid, where we meet the rest of the main party. A blitzball player named Waka, an outwardly cold and strict woman called Lulu, a giant cat beast man called Kamari, and the game's secondary protagonist, Yuna. Yuna is a summoner, a somewhat divine and revered title given to those who are able to summon the faith into aeons. The role of a summoner is to take a pilgrimage to all of the temples in Spira, gathering aeons and proving they are worthy of the final summoning. This is a task endorsed by Yevon, the somewhat de facto religious ruler of Spira, to defeat Sin and bring the calm, a time of peace, free of sin before it inevitably comes back. So with Tidus being lost in what he's meant to do in this foreign world, he joins Waka, Lulu and Kamari in being one of Yuna's guardians. Joining up with Auron and Rikku later in the story, the seven must journey across Spira and defeat Sin. There's quite a lot to unpack here and it can't be explained well in a simple paragraph. Wanting to remain somewhat spoiler free, even for a game that is now 25 years old, makes it tricky to divulge all the ins and outs of the story and the lore of the world, which I must say is brilliant. Final Fantasy X covers a lot of different ideas and explores what happens to people in a world ravaged by natural disasters and caught up in religious extremism with Yevon and the people of Spira. The teachings of Yevon state that humanity sinned so hard in the past that they need to repent harder than a porn star becoming a pastor, and with enough prostration, Spira will be free of sin, and the people believe this so hard that Yevon has become the governing body. Anyone who uses technology forbidden by Yevon or who speak out against them are branded heretics and traitors, something that is very prevalent even today. And you learn pretty quickly, if you're paying attention, that Yevon is full of shit. The Al Bhed were such people who dared to question Yevon's practices and the use of Machina not deemed safe. So with Rikku being Al Bhed and Waka being the most devout follower of Yevon in the party, the friction that grows can be quite explosive. If you think about it, Final Fantasy X is an isekai, a genre of story that picks and drops a character in an unknown and new world and forces them to figure it all out. The narrative watches people from two completely different worlds grow close through shared experience and bond over tragedy, with a wish to save who and what they can. A story that deals with generational trauma and corrupt institutions. It's very well written and presents the issue of what I previously mentioned, asking the player to think for themselves. Final Fantasy X's cast, while maybe touted as one of the stronger in the series, can be a bit of a mixed bag for me. Let's start with Tidus. He's shown to be a young and cocky sports star with a certain level of arrogance. He's good at what he does, and he knows it while being scared of constantly being overshadowed by his father, Jecht. 10 years before the events of the game, Jecht went missing, and Tidus couldn't really give two shits. His mother passed away not long after Jecht's disappearance and presumed death, leaving Tidus alone and blaming his father for the death of his mother, on top of his already large hatred for the man. This lays the groundwork for a great character arc, where Tidus can learn to step out of his father's shadow by becoming his own man, and learning to truly care for others by letting go of his slightly self-obsessed nature. The problem I have with Tidus is that he already kind of has this, but then doesn't. He very quickly shows that he cares about others while being a self-centered dick at the same time. He's a very contradictory character, and he gives me tonal whiplash. One minute he's doing everything he can to help others, the next he's projecting nothing but main character fuckboy energy. And it happens all across the story. There's no consistent growth because he'll swap to and fro depending on what the story thinks he needs to be at the moment, instead of having him progress through it. One minute, determined to save Yuna. Next, he's acting like a mopey wannabe emo teenager. I get he was just told something that shook his worldview, but he still should have a more stagnant energy about him. Not like his mum told him to get off the gaming console at 1 AM on a school night. Probably an unpopular opinion, but Tidus is an unlikable protagonist and is a major thorn in my side if I ever decide to play Final Fantasy X again. But that cannot be said for 10's secondary protagonist. Yuna is someone who holds herself with quiet confidence. She's calm, graceful, and her conviction to see something through is beyond admirable. After Jack disappeared from Zanarkand, he ended up in Spira, much like Tidus did, and like Tidus again, became a guardian to a summoner. That summoner was Yuna's father, High Summoner Braska. 10 years before the events of the game, Braska brought about the Last Calm, giving his life in the process to bring a time of peace to the people of Spira. Yuna has decided to follow in her father's footsteps and journey to the final Aeon. She is an example of not letting the paternal pressure of her father's achievements get in the way of who she is. If anything, Braska's achievements have inspired her, granting Yuna great mental fortitude. She knows the role she's taken on and what it means. She knows what it will cost to get the job done, and she doesn't blink in the face of death. She stares it down. Yuna is a gentle and beautiful young woman on the exterior that houses a sense of purpose that cannot be rocked, even when her faith in Yevon is shaken apart. She chooses to continue her journey because if she decides to forego the pilgrimage, another summoner will just take her place, and she couldn't live with herself knowing her inaction caused the death of another. Wakka, Lulu and Kimahri serve as Yuna's first guardians, and acting as more like older sibling types to her. Kimahri is a Ronso, a warrior tribe native to the harsh Mount Gagazet. The environment and culture of the Ronso breed hard as nails sons of bitches. They are a proud and gallant race, not afraid of facing down even the toughest of foes to protect what's theirs. Kimahri is very much the same for Yuna. He is stout in his defense of her, and I like that. While Kimahri might be big in comparison to the party, to other Ronso, he's a runt. A problem I have with Kimahri is that he doesn't really have much of a character arc, with the exception of overcoming the two Ronso, Yenki and Baran, who took his horn, which is a source of deep shame for the Ronso. Kimahri doesn't really do a lot. Lulu is an initially cold and closed woman. She has served previous summoners on their pilgrimages, so she is a source of wisdom and knowledge to the player. Given that Tidus is in a world that he doesn't know or fully understand, it would make sense for a more knowing character to explain things. This is a good way to disguise exposition as furthering the story without feeling like a lore dump. Lulu is more often the voice of common sense and reason, helping to center the party when emotions get riled up. She's a solid character, and once she opens up and starts trusting Tidus, becomes even more likable. Now Wakka is a different beast altogether. He is a deeply religious man, steadfast and unwavering in his commitment to Yevon. A year before Tidus arrives in Spira, Wakka's younger brother Chapu fought alongside the Crusaders, a militaristic organisation tasked with stopping sin in its tracks while the summoners journey to gain the final Aeon. Chapu would die in this fight. Adding to the previously mentioned hatred of the Al Bhed and their use of Machina that Yevon has forbidden, Chapu fought with an Al Bhed weapon, and not the sword that Wakka would gift to Tidus. Wakka is the perfect representation of someone who blindly follows a religion or doctrine without thinking about what they're actually being told. The indoctrination of Yevon makes him openly distrustful of anyone who speaks out against the practices and teachings. He ends up being pretty racist when things get heated. It's not until his understanding of the world is brought into much sharper focus and hue that he understands his blind faith and hatred of others who simply don't agree with him is the most toxic state of mind to be in. In himself, Wakka is a very likable character. He's kind and considerate to his friends, he doesn't hesitate in helping Tidus out the first time he sees him, and he takes his role as Yuna's guardian very seriously. Now Rikku is an interesting character. While she serves quite a niche role in combat and so some tend to leave her with Kamari to warm the bench, in terms of her role and personality, she's fantastic. Rikku is a very charming girl with a lot of heart and sass. She cares deeply for her family and her people while also having a brilliant mix of naive optimism, yet a maturity beyond her years. She fills out the archetype of the younger sister to the group. She's spunky and funny with a lot of banter. But her knowledge of how things apparently have to go to end Sin and what will happen to Yuna makes her fiercely protective of her cousin, committed to find a way where the final Aeon is no longer required along with the rest of the Al Bhed. Due to her race and how they view Yevon after the Al Bhed were attacked by them, the initial friction between Rikku and Wakka is explosive once he finds out what Rikku is, as I previously mentioned. It's actually Rikku who starts Wakka down the path of thinking for himself, since she flat out asks him if he's incapable of doing it.
But you Al Bhed used the forbidden machina. You know what that means? Sin was born because people use machina.
You got proof? Show me proof.
It's in Yevon's teaching. Oh, not that you know.
That's not good enough. Yevon says this, Yevon says that. Can't you think for yourself?
Rikku adds a much needed levity to the story. Her youthful vibrance helps keep the party moving, and I think she's one of the stronger of the cast. And to round out the main party, we have Auron. Auron served with Jecht as a guardian to Braska. Once just a young man with a more idealistic view of the world, his journey sheds light on it all and he grows, not bitter or resentful, but apathetic. After Braska brought the calm and he lost his two closest friends, Auron journeyed to Zanarkand to watch over Tidus at Jecht's request, eventually bringing him to Spira. He's the wizened older man, he's the mentor, the one who holds all the knowledge of everything to come and lets the others figure it out for themselves, only letting slip information if he feels like they're taking too long to catch the drift. Auron has a natural power and stoicism to him that gravitates others and makes him a natural leader for the Guardians. His role as Braska's Guardian has given him a somewhat legendary status that he has no interest in. Auron isn't a character who doesn't care about much because he thinks it makes him look cool. He's been naturally scarred by his past experiences and so he layers up this aloof nature which just masks his anger at how Spira works. All of this makes Auron one of the best characters in the whole of Final Fantasy. With the party taken care of, there are only two more characters I'd like to speak about. While characters like Micah or Cid are prevalent, there's not much I can actually talk about them. Final Fantasy X has two main antagonists. First is Seymour, a maester of Yevon who's been deadened to the world and blinded by the power that he has. His ultimate ambition is to become Sin itself and gain ultimate power. Seymour doesn't have the outwardness of a villain until the reveal of his father's murderer. He always had an uneasy air up to that point, especially so in Guado Salam, but him being a brief playable character during the events of Operation Mi'ihen gives the idea that he's a powerful ally who might pop back for certain battles. His switch shines all his previous scenes in a new light and brings out how sinister and borderline scary the guy can be. There is not a shred of light left in this man. He's bitter and evil and he's fantastic. And finally, I want to talk about Sin, as a plot device, as an antagonist, and as a character. Sin is the representation of natural disasters. It's sudden, unrelenting, and has no agenda as to who it kills. It is here to wreak havoc at the will of Yu Yevon, the true villain of the story. The final Aeon needed to defeat Sin requires one of the Summoner's Guardians. They fuse with the Faith and become the final Aeon. After Yu Yevon's outer shell is destroyed, it will fuse with the final Aeon to create a new Sin. The time that it takes for this to work is known as the Calm. Braska was the last summoner to bring a Calm. One of his two Guardians is still here, the other hasn't been seen for 10 years. Jecht offered himself to Braska to become his final Aeon, and as a result, Jecht became Sin. The primary protagonist's father is the reason why Spira is in its current state, and that's why Jecht brought Tidus to Spira in the first place, to meet Yuna and join her in ending his destruction. Jecht is actually quite a complex character. He believed in tough love, and then, combined with his own arrogance, resulted in Tidus' resentment of him. After Jecht arrives in Spira and joins Braska, he grows quite a lot as a character, learning humility and honour, eventually offering himself to Braska. You see this through flashbacks from spheres and information from Auron and Yuna's encounters with him. Jecht's arc is what Tidus's should have been. As a collective, Final Fantasy X's cast is superb. Heroes you want to root for, a man just wanting help to end something he can't stop, and an outright cold arsehole that you're happy to beat up a few times. Again, my opinion on Tidus might be unpopular, but I find him to be inconsistent and a misfire. He could have been done so much better, but he fell flat. Kimahri doesn't serve much of narrative use, but he's a solid rock for Yuna. The rest of the cast, I think they're well written and all suit their purposes brilliantly. Final Fantasy X's combat mechanics are also another aspect where this game is remembered fondly. From Final Fantasy IV onwards up until Final Fantasy IX, combat operated on a form of ATB, active time battle, where fighting happens in real time and it's a constant balance of attack and defend while operating on a time limit before the enemy can move. Combat goes from thinking on the fly to more of a game of chess. ATB is subbed out for a more traditional turn-based battle system, where you have more time to think and plan out moves. The conditional time battle. All of the information is right there for you to use and form your strategy around to manipulate the flow and pace of the fight. Certain generic encounters can fall into archetypes of evasive flyers, speedy attackers, armoured brutes and elemental enemies, and it's your job to switch around the party to best suit the needs of the moment. Unlike previous games where you have your party of 3 and you have to actively sub characters in and out between encounters, Final Fantasy X allows for on-the-fly switching, adding another layer of strategy. Tidus is your primary for speedy and sly enemies. Wakka is your main for flyers. Lulu is your standard black mage who can be used in a variety of different situations. Auron handles the armoured brutes who need a piercing weapon. Yuna fills the slot of the more defensive support while being able to summon Aeons, evening out her offensive output. Rikku is the thief of the group. Stealing can dismantle mechanical enemies without dealing damage, and she can use various items to either deal big damage or buff the party. Then we have Kimahri. Our big furry friend fills the spot of the blue mage, having the ability to steal powers and abilities from enemies. His position on the sphere grid is also very unique in that he's right at the centre, allowing you to take him in any direction that you like. He's the jack of all trades. X's battle system has great depth, and the management is always fun to use and play about with. Let's quickly talk about the sphere grid. This is the main way that your characters gain stat boosts and new abilities. Each character has their own designated path to follow, but can be broken off by unlocking certain paths onto other grids. Or you can use the expert sphere grid and move about pretty much as freely as you like. I like the sphere grid as an upgrade system. If anything, it's what Final Fantasy XIII should have been. 10 may appear linear in progression, but provided the right items, you can customize to your heart's content. Another way of gaining abilities and stat gains are your weapons and your armor. Again, provided enough items and valid pieces of equipment, you can freely customize to suit certain playstyles or to substitute abilities that might be on a character that you don't want to bring into battle. Wakka has Dark Attack by default, but you can equip Dark Touch onto a weapon and have a chance of activating that effect without using mana. Same goes for defensive spells. Things like SOS Protect and Haste can be used if you don't have characters available with those spells. I find Final Fantasy X's upgrading systems to be fun, innovative, and very free. Definitely one of the best in the whole series. But Final Fantasy X isn't just run and fight. There is a fair amount of side content that can be accessed as you progress through the game. The main of which is Blitzball. I hate Blitzball. The game itself relies on cheap tricks and manipulation to succeed instead of a balanced experience. Then we have chocobo racing, lightning dodging, butterfly catching, all of which makes me want to smash my head through my bedroom wall. Luckily, all of this is optional with the exception of one Blitzball match you need to play to progress the story. Then we have the Cloister of Trials that need to be completed before achieving each Aeon, and these range from passable to awful, and why can we not pick up 2 spheres at once? There are a lot of secrets scattered all over Spira, and hunting them down can range from engaging to infuriating. For every Final Fantasy up until 10, Nobuo Uematsu was the sole composer. Over 15 years, he had composed hundreds of different tracks, some of which are considered some of the most impactful and beautiful music in gaming. With this in mind, I can understand that Uematsu began feeling uninspired, and for the first time, he requested assistance to complete the soundtrack for Final Fantasy X, Masashi Hamauzu and Junya Nakano. Uematsu spoke about the selection of these two men to help him in an interview where he stated that they could create the music he couldn't compose, and citing that both make interesting and original works. Having listened to a lot of Uematsu's work in my life, it became evident to me that much of Ten's soundtrack was not composed by him when listening with a more critical ear. Hamauzu, for instance, likes the use of bright piano. This is even more evident when looking at the soundtrack of 13 that Hamauzu composed. Ten's soundtrack is predictably amazing and distinct from previous Final Fantasy soundtracks. The inclusion of Nakano and Hamauzu brings new life to the work and allowed Uematsu to focus on his ideas and find that inspiration. While I don't think 10 is my favourite overall, it is still spectacular. I think it's safe to say that Final Fantasy X fully deserves all of its praise. 10 was exactly what the series needed in the new generation of consoles, and it provided everything that fans and new players expected and deserved. While I do have my problems with some of the execution and direction choices, it goes without saying that 10 should be in the top 5 Final Fantasy games for anyone with half a brain. And if anyone makes the claim that it's their favourite, I would completely understand. This game is still talked about and referenced even today for many reasons. And for a game only just younger than myself, that is some serious staying power in the cultural zeitgeist. I still listen to this soundtrack, I still quote the game, I make a point of playing it at least once every couple of years. I really do like Final Fantasy X. I borderline love it. The cast is memorable, and some even break into all-time greatest Final Fantasy characters. The story is beautifully told, the themes that it chooses to cover, and how it does, are crafted and presented incredibly well. The OST is second to none in many regards. Even if the localization can be a bit rough with weirdly paced dialogue and some bad choices at times with voice direction, I still enjoy conversations between these characters. They feel like people making human decisions, and if we ever get a release that allows us to skip cutscenes, there are a select few scenes where I won't use that. In the end, Final Fantasy X is where it is simply because it deserves to be. Marco Pierre White once said that perfection is lots of little things done well. Accept imperfection, and in doing so, you'll create perfection. Square damn near created perfection, and I applaud them for this. To Yoshinori Kitase, Motomo Toriyama, Daisuke Watanabe, Kazushige Nojima, Tetsuya Nomura, Nobuo Uematsu, Masashi Hamauzu, Junya Nakano, and the many others who helped bring this art to life. On behalf of myself, and all those who have loved this game over its 25 years, arigato gozaimashita.